Hello all and welcome to our next video of discussing polyfragmentation. As the title of the video suggests, we are going to be discussing the basic aspects of polyfragmented dissociative identity disorder that make it slightly different than regular dissociative identity disorder, or DID as it is pronounced in the abbreviated form. As you all may be able to notice from my accent, I am not Gavin. My name is actually Thomas. I am a psychology researcher, so they chose me to, I guess, introduce this video since they said it was more along lines of my line of work. Now, most of you all, if you are watching this video, you already know the basic groundwork of what dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is. So we will not go into a massive amounts of detail explaining it. But one of the first distinct differences between dissociative, I guess what you would consider regular DID, and polyfragmented DID is the severity of the splitting that occurs when that trauma is being undergone. As with regular DID, normally there will be a handful of splits, maybe 3, 4 or more parts that will contain the memories and emotions of the trauma that had been undergone. However, with polyfragmented DID, the difference is the amount of splitting. Whereas instead of having a handful, 3, 4 more handful of parts, you will have this massive breakdown of 100 to thousands of parts that will show up at once to deal with the emotions or the memories involved. Forgive me if you see me looking down. I'm looking at my notes. Attempting to make sure that the information is given properly. As I am a bit nervous, this is my first time officially out, so please bear with me and have patience. It would be greatly appreciated. But as I was saying, with the breakdown of parts, with the hundreds to thousands, you have more of what is considered fragmented or fragment alters, where they are more one-dimensional. They can hold only maybe one specific memory or maybe one specific emotion, as opposed to with regular DID, where you could have more three-dimensional alters, ones that will hold the entirety of the situation within themselves, as opposed to it being broken down between multiple fragments. Criteria to be considered polyfragmented varies from doctor to doctor. There's many that consider dozens to be polyfragmented. There's some that consider no, it has to be 20 or more. The most recent of criteria that I have seen is usually therapists and doctors will consider 100 plus to be considered polyfragmented. The difference in what causes polyfragmentation as opposed to regular DID is its prolonged abuse by most commonly by multiple abusers, as opposed to just one or two specific abusers. Switching also very difficult to notice. The switching between polyfragmented systems as opposed to regular systems is very difficult to notice, as we have seen, even with our own system, switches could be very slight in notice. Most commonly, we are the ones that will notice it more so than anybody else. As I said, more along the lines of what causes polyfragmentation, usually you're going to find more systems like that with cult abuse, ritual abuse, or other forms of extreme abuse taken over a long period of time with multiple abusers. So it does not technically have to be ritual abuse or cult abuse, but it just an extreme abuse done ritualistically over a long period of time can also cause it. As I said, alter counts can be anywhere from 100 plus to more. Our system personally has closer to the 10,000s, so numbers, large ones, are not exactly impossible by any means or stretch of the imagination. Other terms that you might have heard or may not know of that they have is they will sometimes refer to polyfragmented systems as super multiples. There is also polyfragmented multiples. Before, when dissociative identity disorder was known as multiple personality disorder, it was originally deemed complex multiple personality disorder. And the reason for that being was the difference in the structure between regular DID and polyfragmented DID. Now, with DID in general, there is layering, so to speak, where you will have a certain group of alters that hold a specific memory in general, but before you can get to them, you will find another set of alters above them. But in order to be able to get to that level lower, you have to get through the first level by resolving any other issues and whatnot here before you can get here. That is how regular DID functions. With polyfragmented systems, the layering and the structure is much more complex than that. Instead of having one or two layers, you may have like multiple levels or layers, depending on what it is and how it was that the layers are arranged. But the concept is still the same. You know, in order to be able to get to here, you have to get through all these layers first. And there's also a term that you will find a lot is that with polyfragmented systems, majority of the time the layering as to why there are so many levels is for the purpose of self-preservation. If there is a memory that is just absolutely cannot be handled by just one alter, those other alters will be more as a forefront to disguise or hide that main trauma holder that holds the majority of all of that pain and whatnot that was undergone. An example that we can share is with we had an alter named Hansen. I say had because there's been some changes recently, since then. But within him, in himself in general, lived his, I guess you could say his twin, Jackson, who held a majority of the trauma from childhood. Hansen was more the cover-up, so to speak. That he had his own issues, but he was mostly just what was left over, like the edges of the effects from that trauma. Basically, I guess the best way to describe it would be like being in a funhouse with trick mirrors. You see all these different versions of you, but you are the main one that in that middle, but you have all these other images. Eventually, Hansen and Jackson split, and they became known as twins because they looked exactly alike. The styles and everything were a bit different, but they were once you know, part of the same. Now, another term that can be used for situations similar to that would be what is also known as subsystems. Very common in polyfragmented systems. For us, personally, we do not have a large abundance of subsystems. What we do see more of is that layering, more like a hierarchy of sorts, where there will be a main alter holder, trauma holder, and so or such, and there will be, if you want to say it as in the form of a kingdom, there's the queen, and then below her, her advisors, and then the nobles, and then the common people. It's a layering system from to seniority. Right. Memories. Because of how complex and how broken up polyfragmented systems can be, remembering specific details of traumas can be very, very, very difficult or nearly impossible because of how broken up those pieces of that memory can be between different alters and how many were broken from that set memory, traumatic memory. Obtaining every single piece of the puzzle, so to speak, for that memory, it can be very, very difficult. Fortunately, you do not need to remember everything in order to heal, so that is a plus. But obtaining that information in its entirety, depending on the situation and the system itself, not always 100% guaranteed. Now, therapy-wise, yes, having a polyfragmented system can seem very chaotic, very difficult, but when you scientifically look into the breakdown of how the polyfragmented system is and how it works, it's actually very structured and very organized, so to speak. Yes, with dissociative identity disorder comes, you know, the alters that hold that trauma, that and those memories that can cause problems. But once you really look at the structure of it and who does what for their job and their roles, everybody has a specific place. Everybody has a specific job, has a specific position, and it's there for a reason, for whatever circumstances when they were needed that made them necessary. It is yes, sometimes helping them overcome whatever roles that were necessary at the time may not be so necessary now. That is where you're going to find a lot of issues, is trying to convince them otherwise from our personal experiences. But working with polyfragmented systems does not necessarily mean that it's going to be harder. The basic mechanisms behind polyfragmented systems is the same as regular systems. So as for terms of treatment, not going to be that different. Do know that we have had some integrations, or final fusions is the term that's more, I guess, research-wise more correct. But personal preference, whichever you feel inclined to use, that's more comfortable for you. I do know that between polyfragmented systems, integration and the fusion can be easier if it's done if integration is done with those fragments and parts, as opposed to regular systems where they have more three-dimensional alters with more memories and more emotions with them integrating, or fusions can be very, very much more demanding and painful and difficult as opposed to fragments fusing and whatnot. But overall, does that mean that because polyfragmented systems are created from more abuse, does that make it worse? Or is regular? Quite frankly, there is no difference in any of it. The basic bottom line is that dissociative identity disorder in general is created through massive amounts of abuse and trauma that no child, much as any person, should have ever had to undergo to begin with. So there is no better or worse in any aspect of it. It was just not experiences that nobody should have ever had to have undergone in general. So they are both horrible disorders. However, I don't want to say like horrible, but created through horrible means, defense mechanisms that should have never originally been put into action. But we are here. We're all here for a reason, based on what our roles or our job is, and we plan on doing those roles in our jobs the best of our abilities, and with changes that have to be made, we will do our best to make those changes as necessary to be able to live and coexist and manage with life itself in general. And that's how, both systems, what makes necessary for all systems, whether it be regular DID system or polyfragmented one, there is no difference. I believe that is the general overview. If those of you that are wanting for anything more specific or have in line any questions in general, feel free to leave a comment, and I will look through my notes and research and see what we can do on that. I don't know if I would be doing the video. Hopefully I made this to where it was understandable and not so scientific that nobody can understand it. If any offense was made, I apologize. But please just let us know. As I mentioned, if you have anything specifically in mind that you would like to have spoken of or anything else. I believe some of the more videos that we will be producing will be more along the lines of us personally, unless we have anyone else that has something else in mind. But that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next time.